Welcome to the Globally Connected Podcast. Today is going to be a great episode as we have our very first special guest. And today we're going to be talking about the role of global partnerships in fostering inclusive growth. And that is going to encompass a bit of economic development, international trade, and the power of community and network. I'm gonna give a background of our special guest. She's a legend. Let me just say, she's a legend. I call her a legend. Give her flowers publicly. Alia Abbas is our special guest. Um, she's an internationally recognized economic development leader. She's the CEO and founder of Alia Consulting, which is an economic development firm. She has an extensive background in disaster and emergency management, business continuity, and economic development. She has built a firm specializing in investment attraction, supply chain strategies, and disaster recovery planning. Her firm provides strategic guidance to economic development organizations, ensuring resilience and sustainability in their operations. She has extensive background and experiences collaborating with municipalities across Canada and the United States, where she possesses a deep understanding of diverse community needs. She has worked extensively with organizations such as the IEDC, which is where we met, the City of Toronto, the City of Brampton, and Toronto Global to develop business retention and expansion, FDI, which stands for Foreign Direct Investment and Strategic Community Planning Initiatives. Currently, she serves as an advisory council member at the Great Lakes Economic Development Council and as a board member in Business Retention and Expansion International. As far as international recognition and prestigious awards, she was honored with the 2023 Top 40 Under 40 Award by DCI and Jorgen Consulting at the IEDC Leadership Summit in Phoenix, Arizona. Additionally, she received the Bright Ideas Award from the Economic Developers Council of Ontario for her pioneering performance measurement metrics report, which played a crucial role in helping economic developers recover from the COVID 19 pandemic. Lastly, Aaliyah's leadership and impact have been further recognized by York University, where she was awarded the York University Community Changemakers Alumni Award for the category of Tentanda. Sorry if I mispronounced that via. And this award highlights her innovative and daring leadership, reflecting the university's motto, "The way must be tried." I must say that's quite a background. Again, congratulations to you. You are a legend. We appreciate you and we thank you. And now I'm going to provide some context of how Aaliyah and I met. So it was in 2022. I was doing the IEDC fellowship, and I was a part of the inaugural Economic Developers Fellowship. I was doing my fellowship in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but it wasn't until after the fellowship was completed where I connected with her via a constituent of mine who told me to reach out to Aaliyah because she was a great person to connect with, etc. So I reached out to her via LinkedIn and I sent her a message. We connect, had a phone conversation, and ever since then, history has just it's been continuing to flow. Whenever I need something, she's there. Whenever she needs something, she's there, and that is a great example of the power of community and networking. So I'm gonna stop rip rapping, and I'll just let you give yourself whatever you want to say, only a brief introduction before we turn it over to GT.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me on this amazing podcast. I'm excited to hear what type of questions you guys have for me today. But yeah, definitely community network and meeting you, Jerome. I think it was an opportunity for us to just listen to each other. I feel like community is very important when it comes to building connections. It doesn't have to always be in person. As I mentioned, virtual is very important too. So we have to be globally connected too with a lot of people, and I think you guys are doing that, depending on this meeting too, because I think I'm based in Canada, you're based in the US, and then we have Gigi based in Bangkok. So I feel like there's opportunity for us to just bond over, maybe similarities. It could be something that you're interested to you. So I feel like there's no fear in making those connections and just talking to people, saying, I want to talk to you. And I think that's where we kind of bonded on, in terms of how do we navigate economic development? What does it look like for a career path role? What opportunities lie ahead? So it was great to make those connections, and I really appreciate that. So I'll leave it to Gigi.
Thank you for coming, Aaliyah. We're very excited to have you. So I'll go ahead and ask you first to start off, like, what inspired you into the work that you're doing today and the career path that you have chosen?
Yeah, so I would definitely go back to like my, university time. So it's definitely been my education that has kind of driven me towards this career path that I am in now, but also through networking. So I initially started my career in like my education in geography, and then from that, and I remember like in the first year, they gave an option of like whether to take physical geography, human geography. At that time, I had no idea. I was like, okay, I'm going to stick with the world geography. I want to know what's happening first globally. Then I'm going to figure out, okay, if it's human, do I want to focus on more on demographics and people and places, or do I want to look on the physical side of, where we are in terms of, climate change, the science behind why certain things are the way they are. So when it came to like my subject, I ended up taking world geography with human geography and physical. I said, you know what? I'll take it as an elective, but I'll take the course. And that's where my entire, career path started, where I was like, okay, this is amazing, where I got a global context on global issues and what's happening around the world. And I think that's very important, especially in this time frame. Like, you can't just be tunnel vision about your city, your community. You have to find best practices. And I feel like understanding how other countries or continents are working around that and looking at different trade agreements is how you're able to establish yourself, right? So I feel like in order for a city or even a community to grow or find best practices, they have to rely on other examples. I feel like I think of it this way: a problem that may be a problem to you, maybe a problem that someone has already solved. So there's no new problems. There's people that are navigating it, right? I feel like the pandemic itself gave us like a good example of that, where everyone was impacted. It couldn't be just one community. So when it comes back to my education, ended up doing planning. So I ended up taking that in second year. I said, you know what? I want to do geography and planning as my major. So I ended up doing urban studies. From that, I was able to understand, okay, why do businesses or why do people choose a certain city, location being critical? Then moving on to the planning piece, which was more so why certain zones, why are certain communities zoned for residential, commercial, industrial, and that's how communities are divided. That and helped me understand policies around why certain places have certain restrictions, why you can't just randomly build a parking lot wherever you want to build it, why can't you get a certain business next door to you for convenience purposes, maybe, right? So I think that gave me the perspective on policy, zoning, and understanding what type of legalities there are in terms of like partnerships. So now I was able to identify geographers. We have the GIS people. They're helping us map and identify our community. Then we got the planning people who are telling us basically what's under, like kind of telling us the layers of our community in terms of this is the soil, this is what's able to be built on here, what this is what's not, right? And talking about the history of the community too, right? What's been done in the past. Another thing I kind of build on was once I completed that degree, I just felt like everyone just talked about a utopian city, like a perfect city. And that was the textbook examples that we would see too, right? Like these are the stuffs you have to do in order to make your city thrive or grow. I had kind of another perspective where I was like, I had family in the States too. So I was always like, it's not really like that. They have disasters and then everything is like wiped out, right? And then they're building from scratch. So that's where I kind of navigated towards disaster emergency management. And I said, you can't have a perfect community, right? There's going to be something that comes into play. Either your mayor, there's something wrong with your mayor's history, and maybe they don't have the reputation that you thought they had once you elected them. Second could be the play on, you have certain risk in your community, and it could be natural, or it could just be a company deciding to leave your community, and that could impact, right? So I ended up looking at disaster emergency management, but from the lens of how do we cope with that? How do we recover? How do I build? Now my community is becoming the community I didn't think it was going to be, like the perfect, everything is placed where I want it to be. Now it's a tornado just came through and just ransacked through all the cars or everything everywhere else. Now I have to build from scratch. So I was looking in that perspective of how do you rebuild a community, whether it be a devastation from a disaster or a company leaving. The devastation after that, employment loss, people not being able to find jobs in a certain sector because that sector has decided to leave, or that major employer of that sector has decided to leave. So that's where I was drawn into it. But even within disaster emergency management, I found out that there's actual layers to it. There's people specializing on the psychology of it. So the after impact of once a disaster has happened, the toll it takes on psychologically for people. So there was the psychological piece. Then there's the other piece of crisis communication. How do you communicate with the public about a disaster before it happens and even after it's taken place? Then there's the piece of business continuity. How do you keep businesses open? And that is something that made me feel interested. And I was like, oh, I want to do that. Then there's other areas of response. How do you respond to a disaster? I saw a lot of friends in there that were in the paramedics, firefighter, policing, or even veterans that were in that field. So I was like, oh, this is amazing. I got to find partners and understand how they come together during a disaster. So the two areas that I specialized in was looking at business continuity, and second piece was crisis communication. The reason why I chose those two perspectives was because when it came to my work of urban planning, I was drawn automatically to the business community. That has something to do with my family ties as well, and being in the business background and hearing those conversations take place. It's like, oh, we want to relocate. But I never got to see that until now. When I'm talking to business, I'm like, this is the conversation, that would take place in our household. So that kind of led that for me to understand the importance of businesses and how to keep them open. So it's not about just starting a business. It's all the way to how do you keep them open and keep them in your community through business continuity. Crisis leadership is more so the crisis communication piece is how do you communicate to the business? How do you educate them, or even not even educate? Sometimes the businesses are educating you on this is what's working, not what you're putting into policy. And I got to see that through economic development. That led me to economic recovery. And I ended up looking at, okay, now how do I respond to this in terms of recovery piece? And that led me to economic development. So from there, I was able to identify, oh, these are the key players that are talking to the businesses. It's not the planners at this point, because the planners are the ones I felt come into play once a business has decided to come to your community. So they would come in and tell you. So I feel like they're like the site selectors, as we would say in economic development. So they help you with the processing of, this is the site we have available in our community. Is this where you want to be? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It sometimes has to do with cost. Another thing in terms of disaster emergency management that you may want to think in business continuity is there's brownfields, right? So brownfields are contaminated sites in a community. So that could also prevent a business from coming in. Then there's the environmental piece where they may have to do EPA, where they talk to the Environmental Protection Agency to help them with that, right? And there's a cost to it. So maybe the business is like, I don't want to take on that additional cost. I'm trying to get these really nice cushiony incentives for me to relocate. So I feel like when it comes to my education is what has led me to become the economic developer I am today, and finding this profession. Another thing is through my experiences of first starting out, through my opportunity with IEDC, through my network connections. I ended up taking some courses, and that's where I met my first mentor. It was Jeff Finkel. At the time, who was the former CEO of IEDC, and he kind of, walked me through the process of understanding what economic development is all about. And I explained to him in our first meeting, this is my education. I'm looking for a job. What do I do? And I had no problem asking people directly, I'm looking for a job. And I think that's very critical. I think a lot of people are shy once they come out of, studying or, graduate studies. They feel like, I don't know, should I tell this person? But I feel like you won't know the answer until you ask the person. Nobody's going to come to your house knocking on your door telling you that, hey, there's a job here. You have to put yourself out there. And I think it's no shame in asking for people for help. I think there's people need to put away their pride, or let's say their ego, or the shame of you're asking for help. The most they can say is no. They're human. They're just like you, right? They even were probably struggling finding their first job. No CEO became a CEO just right away, like at birth. Nobody, right? Unless it's like generational wealth, and it's a different story. But like what I'm talking about here is that everyone has worked their way up in some way or form. They've made those connections. And that's where I feel like that's where I am today through my education and then finding those pieces of connections in terms of what I want to do. I felt I wanted to help the business community. So that's where I am now.
Yeah, that's definitely great background. Thanks for sharing that. So that kind of ties into my question, which it sounds like I think I know the answer to the question, but I'll just ask for the viewers. Did you always know that this would be the line of work that you would be doing?
Yeah, like I could say it's okay. Well, I would say I wanted to be a GIS person. Then I realized, okay, there's one component and one aspect that they can help with, which is like the mapping piece, right? But then through my internships, I was able to identify that, oh, I want to work with the planning team. Then I found out, okay, no, the planning team is not the person that's able to answer all of the questions that the business may have. It's this economic development professionals. But before I even got to the economic development professionals, I kind of navigated through number one is my internship with City of Brampton. So I first started with City of Brampton and my first role as an intern in the disaster emergency management department. And that time I had no disaster emergency management experience. I had no idea what this was, but I was just like, I'm going to look for a business continuity job. And I remember going to my career counselor and I'm like, hey, I think there's a business continuity job. And I remember even my counselor at that time was like, oh, yeah, I don't know. I don't think so. I have never seen a job posting like that. But if you can do your research and find a job, then I'll look into that. And I remember I used to like Google like business continuity jobs, and it would like come up like random things. Like now when I look at it, I'm like, oh, succession planning, okay, exit strategy. These are actual jobs. But at that time, as an undergrad, I'm like, I don't know what that is, but okay, moving on. But I ended up finding one opportunity with City of Brampton, and that's how I was able to find that City of Brampton had a disaster emergency management department. And City of Mississauga, where I was born and raised, has this disaster emergency management department. So not every municipality has a dedicated disaster emergency management staff. So that was something where it was interesting for me to learn from City of Brampton that they actually had this department. And they had a business continuity specialist. So I feel like even at the career counselors space, when I'm talking to like the students or people that are listening to this that are looking for a job, sometimes your career advisor or your career counselor doesn't even know your vision. You may know your vision because you're studying, you're reading about it, and you may have to find your own network. Sometimes you're going to end up being your own guider, like, for education, for your career path, because there's a passion. So I feel like there's no point in giving up just because someone said no. Maybe it's another way to do the research, right? Maybe that's opening doors for you to kind of pursue other opportunities, continue looking and finding fields in that. So I ended up looking at headhunters that were looking in that space too. And they said to me, yeah, we don't really do headhunting for government jobs. Oh yeah. So that's not a space that you would look into. So the opportunity I took, I wrote an email to the director at the City of Brampton. And I said, hey, I'm looking for a job. And I've been told that there's no business continuity job. And I would love to work in your space because I see that on your team, you have a business continuity specialist. And I would love to just shadow them. So that was my first job, but I made $0 because I wanted to learn. I didn't care. I was like, I just want to put something on my resume and I want to get the experience, right? Because sometimes it's like either or. It's like it's like the chicken and the egg story. Do I get the money first or do I get the experience, right? It's good if you get both. There's opportunities like that, but I didn't get that. So I just ended up, going in and I put in my hours. I remember there was like a restriction. They're like, oh, you only could do 60 hours. I put 210 hours. I said, I don't care. I'm going to live and breathe this. And I'm going to take this subject on and I'm going to learn about it. And I'm going to learn like hands-on what we could do. That was the first time I even experienced my first disaster, which was a 2013 ice storm. And that was something that kind of opened my eyes to the field too. Where I'm like, oh, what I was thinking about actually came true. I'm not happy about it, to be honest. There was a very devastating disaster. But, it's just seeing something that you've been working on and then talking about it and then see it come into play. So it was kind of like a map, like a playbook where everything I had written, like, this is what you have to do for evacuation, this is what you need to do for the businesses, this is how you do outreach, and then to working with the GIS mapping team to figure out maps for those evacuations. That was something that was very eye-opening for me. So in your long story short, for like, I think these are going to be a lot of the answers for my, your questions that you have. But in terms of like my career path, I had no idea. I had to figure my way out. So from that, I was able to, my first job is what it gave me the exposure of business continuity, and then gave me the exposure of economic development. The way it came back in terms of the experience was that after I did that, I was like, wow, I want to work in disaster emergency management. Like, this is really cool. Like, there's the planning piece, the GIS piece, and I want to work with these people. So I ended up looking at like completing my certification. I wrote papers on this, on how do you do business continuity work. But then I found out through IEDC that they actually had a disaster recovery program, and they were looking for business continuity specialists. So I was like, oh, okay, there's a link here where economic development is tying into my experience of business continuity. And I reached out to IEDC again, and I said, hey, I want to do this volunteer experience. I have the knowledge. And at that time, there was not many disasters that took place, but they said, yeah, we'll keep you on the list. And, if there's anything that comes up, we'll definitely get back to you about it. But in terms of my career path, I felt like I was in a bubble of, okay, either GIS, planning, disaster emergency management, and then economic development. But I wasn't being able to find that one group where I could do everything, where all these different hats that I had. So I was kind of in the search of an organization that could help me do all four of the things that I had specialization in. So I feel like when it comes to job search and finding your first career, it's kind of looking at your skill sets, where you have knowledge and where you could be it, right? Because I know like that saying of jack of all trades, right? But you're a master of none, right? That's the full sentence of it. Because like I had all these different skills, but I had to come down to pick one, right? And that's where I felt my heartstrings was with economic development, where I was like, I'm going to stick to economic development. No more bouncing back and deciding, Alia. Maybe you'll find a job within economic development where you can encompass that. And that's where I've seen that, economic development is that one field where I'm able to bridge my GIS experience, which it comes to investment attraction. I'm able to build up on my planning, where I'm still talking to the planning departments a lot of the time in these municipalities, whether it be working with their departments or just working as a consultant. And I'm talking to the planning team a lot of the times when it comes to investment attraction. And then I'm talking to disaster emergency management professionals when it comes to supply chain related issues. So I feel like that one economic development field is the field for me in terms, it kind of meshes all of my skill sets. So when it comes to me finding it as my first job, I think business continuity is the one that opened the door for me for this career path specifically.
That's amazing, Alita. I love how, you continuously knocked on doors too, and you put yourself out there. And also, I think it's very interesting how you started in geography and then you got deeper and deeper and deeper and like learned things along the way that helped like refine where you're going. So that's really amazing and great tips too, for students out there that are watching the podcast too. Like, don't be afraid to put yourself out there, to reach out to people, to knock on these doors. So I'll move into the next question I have for you. So, how did you transition from working on projects and working with different institutions and governments, et cetera, into actually opening your own consulting firm where you're serving people directly as well?
Yeah, so I feel like the way I came about that path is, as I mentioned, volunteering is very critical for me. I think that is the one way I was able to get that exposure. And I feel like it's also with the opportunities where, as if when you're a new grad or just a person that's just starting out your career, right? There could be also a transition where you're a mid-career person that you've been in the industry for 10 plus years, working either in banking, and now you're trying to make a pivot to another industry, right? So you're still considered new. You could be like however old, right? But I felt like, even for emerging professionals, these type of tips of volunteering is very critical. I think you need to do that because it gives you the exposure and also you to kind of do the stuff that you're passionate about, right? Because I feel like in your day-to-day job, you're kind of boxed into a certain task. You're going to be told, hey, you got to do these research reports, and then there's nothing more, right? I feel like if you just keep yourself devoted to just your job, you will be happy, yeah, but I feel like it's not going to be as fulfilling. So for me, I'm very passionate about giving back and just talking to people, because I'm like, you know what, I think even for like our generation, it's we cannot be just tunnel vision on one specific job title or role. We have to keep connecting and building those networks, especially the fact that now we actually have like the internet, we have these like cell phones, we have so much connectivity, social media, that we have to take advantage of it, right? We have to be able to put and share our ideas. And that's where you're able to find your next job. Maybe that one connection that you just made through volunteering can lead you to another opportunity later on, or they could be your client later on. So for me, by connecting and talking to people, I first wanted to dedicate myself through education. I felt like credibility, building my name is through my education. I understand some people say, oh, education, it doesn't really, it does not, it's not for everybody, right? It's not financial. So financial burden, there's other social issues that people have in their family that prevents them from education. However, but if you have the opportunity to go to school and you have the chance, go. The reason why is because maybe you'll find your friends there. You'll find those connections that you need. Even if you drop out because you're like, it's too much, I can't do it. But at least you went and you tried. That's what I want to focus on. The act of trying. Try something. If it doesn't work, move on to the next thing. However, education for me was very critical in building my foundation of understanding. Like I was like, how can I talk to people if I have no idea about the field? Right? I have to talk with their jargon. I have to use their terms for them to understand and take me seriously and let me be a part of the table. So that's how I leverage my education. Then when it came to my career path, I said, okay, nobody's going to just give me a job right off the bat through my education because that's the only thing I have on my resume. I started volunteering. I said, I'm going to start sitting on these community works. I'm going to start asking people, hey, I have this background. I would love to share on your community. I would love to volunteer my time. And knowing that some of these organizations are getting paid opportunities, if they see free opportunity where a person is educated and has the experience that they're looking for, they're more than happy to bring you on, right? And that's where you can start working on projects. You start getting invited to rooms that you would never have access to before, right? And then also the thing is you're not tied by anything. So it shows your passion, right? You're not getting paid. You're not an employee of that company. So there's like a different way of, and you're able to share ideas, but also you can walk away from the table too if that's not the table you want to be at, and you have no problem walking away from it, right? There's nothing that's tying you or bounding you to it. So I felt like my volunteer experience is where it got me to where I am today. Another critical piece I want to talk about in building my clientele was definitely through my giving back. I feel like a lot of the times people tend to just take from you. And I understand sometimes, you don't have much to offer. You just end up, just picking their brain or just asking them advice. But if there's an article, if there's something that you read or that it would be something of that person, just remembering them on special occasions or, if there's an article that's related to their subject or area of expertise, share it with them. That's how you can kind of make it transactional. So I feel like in this world, there's a lot of give and take. Going back to my point of education and how people use that one example, I've heard it multiple times, even during, in my time in university, where people are like, oh yeah, Bill Gates dropped out of school. Hello, he dropped out of Harvard, okay? There's a network there. So there is that example that you cannot use it on yourself all the time, right? I'm just a rando person. However, I feel like there's still need to build credibility. If you have the generational wealth, perfect. If you have family ties, you fell into the industry because you have family in it, that's wonderful too. But I feel like you have to put a lot of things into perspective when it comes to where you want to see yourself and how credible you want to be, right? If you just want to be mediocre and you're happy with that and you're fine, okay, do it, go ahead. There's no shame in that. But I felt like I want to build a legacy for myself. I want people to remember me not as Alia the taker, Alia that gives back, Alia that contributes to a conversation. And I feel like when you speak, you have to speak in a manner that was what I'm saying of value to the person. Is it going to add value? If it's not going to add value and it's just going to critique, Because I think that's very easy. A lot of people, it's really easy to criticize and discriminate and be mean to people. It's very hard to be nice. I feel like when I ask people, like in my, even when I was teaching in some of the courses in university and colleges and stuff, I always ask my students, I'm like, see something nice about the one person next to you. Because you've been with this person for the past 4 weeks, you should know something, right? And it's really, it puts them in shock. They're like, oh no. I'm like, yeah, I know you don't like this person because you tell me and you kind of say this group project, I don't like this person, but see something nice. And that makes them to think about it, right? Sometimes even in the classroom, I told my students, you're sitting in this same chair for the past 5 weeks. You want to be an economic developer. You want to be a city planner. How are you going to bring change? You can't even change your seat. Move around. Change your perspective. Like look out the window today. Don't just sit at the exit door. So it kind of changes your perspective. Like how can you be a game changer or a person in a community that brings change when you yourself are not changing little things in your life, whether it be through your subject, your education, taking random electives, even in your work life, right? If you're just focusing, oh, I'm just going to be an economic development and that's it. Okay, then you're going to be a mediocre economic developer, no offense. I feel like the way you can add value to your field and to your teammates is through bringing in your experiences from outside volunteering. So I feel like I build my clientele and build my business based on my connections, my ability to put myself out there. Another thing is that through my experiences. So I felt like I had to work in the field first, figure out what are the problems that our day-to-day economic developers are facing. So from that, I identified, oh, sometimes it's a CRM. Sometimes it's challenges regarding, lead generation. Third, I feel in the government, we see a lot of the times is policy and the way things are done. So sometimes the comments I have received, it's like, this is how we always do it. Now, you have to be wary of that word. This is how you always do it. Okay, well, have you done and you seen any progress? No. Okay, so this is why you have to change. And I feel like as a consultant, that's the way I can do that. I can take risks that I wouldn't be able to take risk in the government as in terms of, being able to meet the people I want to meet, connect with the organizations I want to connect with, not having barriers, right? Because there's competition within organizations as well, right? Where they're like, we don't really talk to our competitor unless, there's a need for us to do it, unless they're on the same trade mission as us, then we'll encounter them and then we'll, say hi, bye type thing. So I feel as a consultant, we're able to hear everybody's problems, but then there's a confidentiality to it, right? But you're learning as an individual. You're like, oh, wow, there's so many things I did not know. But what I ended up learning from my consulting work is that, oh my God, if you had just talked to another municipality, you would have realized that they're experiencing the same problem as you. CRM is one thing. Lead generation is one piece. Their strategy in terms of how can they grow in a certain sector. So I feel like when it comes to my work and experience is through, number one is getting myself in the field, learning about the different industry through my work experience, applying for jobs. Then when it came to economic development consulting is where I used all of the experiences I learned and challenges and how to kind of make it easier for them. So I kind of stepped into the opportunity that I got with Toronto Global, where I was able to establish myself as a consultant in that space.
You're perseverant, you're consistent, and you put yourself out there. Everything that you've been talking about so far, I take those three away from it. And I feel like that's a lack nowadays. I'm not sure why that is, but it speaks volumes to where you are and where you're going to go. Um, what is your gift in life, and how do you use that gift to inspire others on your journey?
Yeah. So one thing I think, okay, the reason even I found out about my gift, one thing is like I have a hidden talent of art, so that's how I kind of show my um, feelings and emotions. So a lot of times even when I was doing art, so when going back to that one question that you had of like the field, I thought I was gonna be an artist, to be honest, in high school. If you had asked Alia back then and like when she was like, 13 to like 18, I would be like, yeah, I want to work for Disney. I want to do animation. And then I remember in grade 11, grade 12, I started sketching because we'd go on these long drives with my family and stuff. and we go to the States. So I ended up started sketching along the way, like different architecture and, cities and stuff. And that got me interested. So that's one of my hidden talents. But when it comes to my gift, the way I found out my gift is by talking to people. So I realized that what you say to people, I'm like, even right now, this whole podcast we're doing, I'm just talking. There's no script for me. It's just, I'm saying whatever is in my heart. I'm saying it openly. Like, it's an opportunity for me to share my experience. I don't know who's listening or who's going to listen to this, and, what kind of feelings they may get from after I, like, what I've said today. So I've lived my experiences. I know what I've gone through, the tough times. I'm not just this person that's all happy. There is emotions that are behind it, right? And I think that is what builds me stronger, right? So I just keep myself like, there's certain jobs that I want and I never got. There's certain opportunities that I wanted to do I never got. But I felt those kind of opportunities where I didn't get them, that kind of built me. That pushed me more. I got more of a drive where I'm like, no, this door closing on me, it's not going to make me go, oh, okay, forget about this career. I'm like, I'm going to stick in this field. It's very competitive. It's not easy. I feel like that's for every industry, right? Especially when you want to go up to the top and you want to help people. And my gift is, like, for me specifically, when I talk to people, was that, Alia, like, the gift of giving. You're a very giving person. The way you talk, even like the advice you give. I'm like, yeah, the way I'm going to give you advice, I'm very God-fearing. So I have this like thing where I'm like, yeah, if I say something that does not align with my morals and my ethics as an individual, I can't sleep at night. I just can't. And I can't guide people just for the sake of, like, I want to look good and I'm going to give them this advice and be all smart. No, if I don't have the answer, I'm the one person who's like, I don't have the answer. Don't look at me. I've done that in interviews too. I don't care how it's gone, but I'm like, I don't have the answer. I'm not going to pretend one. I'm not going to just randomly pull out some random answer just to, like, make it look like, yeah, I know my stuff. I'm the one person, if I don't know something, I'm like, I don't know this. I'm not gonna bullshit. Like, pardon my French, but like, I'm not gonna lie to you and pretend to come up with the answer. So I think my authenticity of being myself, being, wholeheartedly, whatever's in my mind, telling them as is, no matter how bitter it comes off, it may come off really wrong. Sometimes you're like, oh yeah, that was not, I'm like, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not at all trying to be rude. I'm just trying to say what I think would be the best for you as a person, because I'm thinking of myself. Like, if I had this opportunity, if I did this, how would I go about it? So I try to guide people in a way that is beneficial for them. I really want my friends to succeed. I want everyone in my circle to succeed. I'm not in a competitive mindset with my circle of friends or even circle of people I just met. Because I'm like, you know what? If I tell you the ingredients for this, right? It's just pretty much like cooking, right? If I share this cupcake ingredient with you and I'm enjoying it, and you ask me, Haley, how do you make it? You're going to make it differently. I don't know how, because you're going to buy certain different products. Brands are tasting different. And maybe you'll be successful in making it different and better than me. But that's not going to make me feel like, oh, Jerome made it better than me. I'm not his friend no more. I want to be actually happy for you. I'll be like, wow, yeah, she did something better and improved it. And I would ask you, like, hey, can you improve my ingredients as well? Right? So I feel like when it comes to gift, is giving in terms of my knowledge. That's what I can give to people. My experiences, something that I've gone through. I feel like a lot of us, when it comes to our parents' upbringing too, we feel like we're kind of boxed in as to, oh, my parents have these expectations of me. My parents, the way they raised me was like, oh yeah, just do everything, but keep in mind that you have to be nice. You have to be a nice human being. When you give people advice, if you don't have anything nice to say and you don't have the right answer, don't say anything at all and tell them that. Just say, this is not the right mind for me right now for me to give you advice. But if you give advice, give them wholeheartedly the truthful advice, the advice that guides them and makes their life. Because I feel like what you say to someone impacts them heavily. So every interaction I've had with people, even at business networking events, I bring it to myself and then I talk about them. Because I feel like when you start a conversation, it's not about me. I feel like if I talk about myself, maybe the person will share about themselves. I'm not the type of person to interrogate people like, hey, tell me about yourself, tell me about this, tell me about that, unless it's interesting what they're saying. And I'm like, oh, I would love to learn more about that. But I start about myself and tell my journey. And then I feel people like, okay, they're like, oh, she's saying so much, let me share mine. I mean, this is something that I find of interest to me. So when it comes to gift giving, it's like, I think giving in your conversations, giving your energy, giving your full focus and attention to people, and then giving them the right advice. And that's what I've received in terms of feedback from people, even after a while, even my students too, where they're like, oh, Miss Abasi, like you gave me really good advice in terms of my career path. And I have seen people grow in their career, whether it be, it's not even economic development. They randomly went off to do be it in law school and they got accepted, or they ended up becoming an architecture, or they ended up working in like a barber shop. Point is, they ended up doing what they were passionate about. And that's, I think, my gift of understanding people's emotions and guiding them in the right direction.
That's nice. That leads to my next point. Um, can you highlight a point within your life where you experienced a difficult time or moment within your career where you questioned if what you were doing or aspiring to do would work? I want you to provide that perspective on what that moment taught you and how were you able to pivot. I ask this question because a lot of times people don't get to see the grind, they don't get to see the hard work, the ups and the downs that goes into being great at what we do, how we have to constantly adapt, and how every day is a challenge. So I'm just curious of your perspective on the time where you had to pivot or just keep persevering.
Yeah, so for me, I think that time was definitely during grad school. And that was because of my paper. So the way that came about, that opportunity, was because I was looking at, in my undergrad, my fourth year paper was more about government relations, looking at, university development, looking at economic development. But that at that time, I ended up in pursuing an opportunity with Detroit and Windsor. And that opportunity came about through my networking, as I mentioned, where there was an opportunity where at that time Windsor was looking for H-1B visas. But they were going to, their students for University of Windsor, students would get granted H-1B visas if they went to Detroit and opened a private clinic. So I was interested about that because I feel like bordering cities that are like close to the border to one another, they're more as one community rather than two separate entities. I don't see them as like two different countries or two different cities. They function as one because I feel like just the border is the thing that's only dividing them, but they have a lot of the challenges that are similar. The industries, the sectors, the demographics. So when it came to Detroit doing that, where they were talking about, this potential idea of creating their downtown core and reviving it through private clinics and hiring students from, their new grads. I felt there was a strategy there. And I was like, wow, this is interesting because you're offering these H-1B visas to these students and you're telling them they have like a 5-year term that they have to be there. Obviously, after 5 years, a person is probably going to get married, settle down, get clients. They're not leaving anytime soon. It's going to be very hard, especially for a doctor. Once you've established your clients, you're not leaving. It's very hard to just hop around from clinic to clinic. So there was a strategy there, and that was very interesting. And that's what I was looking at. I was looking at cross border and how bordering cities look at each other and how they rely heavily on one another when it comes to demographics, tourism, it comes to job opportunities. So that's something that intrigued me. And then I remember I wrote, like, I had applied for grad school, and it was kind of like an opportunity where I just, like, wrote an email to the graduate department. And it just went quiet after that. I was like, oh, I guess I didn't get in, whatever. I ended up getting a call and they're like, hey, Alia, like, we want to talk to you about something. We just want to talk about your paper. And I was like, oh, okay. But what about it? They're like, oh, well, you're mentioning about university, industry, and government relations. We just want to let you know that there's an opportunity for you here if you were to come back to Toronto. And I was like, okay. What is this opportunity about? And I remember, like, for my grad school, it was more so the question of why? Why do you want to do further studies? And at that time, I was like, I'm just going to gun it. I'm just going to go back to back school, finish all of the, studies. And then on top of that, my goal was, because I saw that in geography and in planning, every year something new or something chaotic would come up in terms of policy change, different problems coming up where I was like, oh my God, if I were to step away from this research, I'm going to be outdated really quick when it comes back to like me wanting to enter the field again of academia and trying to, pursue a master's. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. So I had this mindset of like, I'm going to just going to finish my school, get all the education, and then I'm going to pursue the jobs. But it didn't work like that. It was like sometimes I was working, sometimes I was like, in school, but it was an opportunity for me to gain experience this way. So it kind of going back to that story of, so I went in and talking to my dean at that time and for that department, and he sat down with me and he talked to me, and we talked for an hour. And it was very eye-opening for me because he kind of led me in terms of shaping my paper. I was like, okay, well, I'm looking at that. I'm looking at Detroit and Windsor, and I'm just not going to get up and leave this project. I actually committed to some people, and I mentioned to them that I'm going to help them. And now all of a sudden, I feel like I'm abandoning them. So I ended up working around that relationship through telling those people that, hey, there is a project that is coming in fruition for Toronto region that may be best practices that you guys can apply in your community. So that was one way I kind of gave back to that community in the sense of like, hey, I'm not just leaving you guys. I'm just going to go and pursue a research opportunity, and then I can share with you the best practices. But even then, I would go back and forth and talk to them over the phone. I didn't give up on that community at all in terms of finding the answers for them. And then that's how I found out Niagara and Buffalo had that same relationship where they wanted to build a local hospital, but look at hiring students in the medical field to come to their community and help revive it. Same policy, similar to like Detroit and Windsor. So that was interesting. One thing I walked away from that was number one, everyone's drawn to life sciences. Number two, that at that time I did not know it's the sector of life sciences. So they're looking at investment attraction. Second, they're looking in terms of economic development terms, they're looking at workforce development. And then in terms of planning, they're looking at the revitalizing their community through these different practices and policies in place. Then there's the aspect of immigration that's coming into play as well, right? Where there's going to be a give and take, and then there's certain talent being exchanged, and then there's like the brain drain, right, for maybe one community or the other. So when it came to that project, I was identified that our university was actually pursuing to expand another satellite campus. That led me to be interested in the field of, oh my goodness, okay, I want to look at university, industry, and government relationships and how these three people work. So the correct term for that would be the triple helix. That's a triple helix model where university, industry, and government come into play. I felt the fourth piece that was missing is citizens. And there is an actual research out there on citizens and adding that. Because I feel like the public determines which direction, what comes in your community, what doesn't come in, whether it be a business, whether it be the school. If there's a demand by the public, you'll get it, right? But they have to be at the table. Your demographic is what tells you what's going to be happening in your community in the next 10 to 20 years. But going back to the question of, where people did not see my vision was one of my professors. I remember quite clearly walking past her room, and she was like, Haley, can you come back? I just want to talk to you. And I said, yeah. She's like, I read your paper. Your paper's been passed around our department. And I was like, oh, okay. And she was based in the US at that time. And I remember she was like, hey, Alia, your ideas, they're not very Canadian. So I was like, what? They're not very Canadian? What does that mean? It's like, no, the ideas that you're seeing, I'm reading about in your paper, they're pretty much in the States. They've been applied by those different municipalities. And I've seen it in California. I've seen it in North Carolina, South Carolina. And I was like, oh, okay. So there's actual, I'm like, can you give me those lists of those cities? And she's like, yeah, but the practices I'm seeing, it's very American ideas, but you're trying to bring them to Canada. I was like, oh. And then she's like, another thing is that a lot of people are not agreeing with you is because your vision is 10 to 20 years. So you will have to be 20 years in this department for us to actually see what you're saying is come to fruition. And I kid you not, it had been 10 years. So from the start of my first year of my studies, from the idea that I had in my first paper as an undergrad, all the way to my grad studies, even graduating, finding out, yeah, they did win the RFP, which was the proposal. So the province of Ontario accepted the proposal from York University to get Markham campus. Then I projected Town and Multimodal with Laurier, but that conversation had been going on since 2009. That was way before. like I was even in undergrad. So that was something that was interesting to see. Then the relationship between City of Brampton and now, which is what Toronto Metropolitan University is. So at that time, out of the 23, no, sorry, 29 municipalities and universities that had come together to talk about their partnership, I had selected those three. I said, these are the three, based on their RFP, based on what they have said in terms of the requirement, is what I see will be the winning proposals. And you know what? I was praying hard. I was like, please, this paper better like, get published second. I was like, I'm gonna be defending this paper. And it would be so like bad if some other random municipality got it and their university, because it would be like, oh yeah, like, what is this? But thank God it worked out the way it did. But the thing is, some of it was very evident based on the RFP. Like I was like, some of these communities, they're not going to get it, not because they don't have, it's just they didn't have the infrastructure. It was not possible to commute to those communities and back to the other satellite campus. I'm like, a 3-hour trip, I might as well live there now, right? And that professor, and it's a strain on the university, strain on the department heads, the people that want to go to that community and teach classes. It has to be within an hour time frame, right? Because you're going to be on campus, you're going to be teaching for 3 hours plus that. So there was a lot of different things in play. And then sometimes there's a lot of the visions of the mayors that I was looking at. I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is not possible, given your demographic of your community. So it was it was nice to see that some municipalities are very big visioned, where they had like this really strong focus on like, I want to bring this university, but it's not possible for everyone. So from those three municipalities and those three universities and colleges coming together in my paper, it led me to understand the challenges that municipalities face. Before that, and if I were to go back a little bit further, from my undergrad all the way to graduate school, I have interviewed 187 mayors. So within the 7-year time frame, I have interviewed from the United States and Canada different mayors on their leadership style, on why they've become the mayor they are today, what brought them in terms of their election, like why their community voted for them. So this was something that even one of my professors had said, why don't you write a book on this, Alia? Just talking about leadership. Why don't you write a paper on this? I'm like, I will leave that for later. Like, for me at that time, I didn't think of it as a book. I was just like, these are just conversations I had. Like these are just conversations. I was just picking their brain. I talked to them for an hour and I just got to see it. But now I think about it as an economic developer and I'm like, this is a gold mine. So I always go back to those notes. I'm like, what was that mayor saying about their city? What makes the best practice? Like, what did they do? And I'm seeing that. Why certain communities are winners and some communities are suffering, because it's depending on the leadership, right? Sometimes it depends on the person you are voting for. A lot of times you vote for a person in hopes that they'll bring change. You're hoping for a new change in person, because you're like, sometimes you're like, oh, I'm done with seeing the same leader over and over again. I'm going to try voting for another party, another leader, and see what they can do. So I sometimes also agree with the perspective of not everyone votes the way they vote is because they want to see change. People want to see some type of impact, and it has to be with themselves, whether it be their job, their lifestyle, their children's upbringing, where they're seeing hope in that leader. But at the end of the day, I feel like the leader also doesn't identify that city or municipality or those people, because not all their vision or ideas are the same, right? But we're just hoping for the best, I feel like, when it comes to leadership. So going back to that paper and that experience of community, it led to me understand that it's a process. There's a process to everything, especially in this field of economic development, especially my paper. Now in 2024 is when I got to see that campus. Just last year, I went to that new campus. And I was like telling people there, I was like, I have my paper on that. I had no idea if it was going to come to like fruition or not. I just know that they got accepted. Then I heard they're not. Then I heard they're going to get through. There was so many difficulties, but it just to see that in light. And then also last year getting that award from New York University, it was another thing where I was just like, wow, like that was a full circle moment for me. And then even the opportunity where I even got to work with Town of Milton, where I was like, that was a full circle opportunity where I'm like, And I remember I showed that mayor the picture and I said, Mayor Bourda-Prince, like, hey, do you remember, like, I was that undergrad student. And I remember he was in his office by himself that day. And I walked into his office and I said, hey, do you remember this picture? And he's like, yeah, this picture is quite old. This is a really old picture. I was like, yeah, I was in undergrad. I'm that same kid, just like growing up, but I'm working in economic development. And at that time, I kid you not, my entire process was like, there's no job as economic development. There's no job. We never heard of that. And that was like the motion. And I was like, what do you mean? There's people, I interviewed them. Like, there's 27 of them. I interviewed them. And that's how I was able to find economic developers in these different communities. And they're like, yeah, Alia, we actually work with our planning department. A lot of us have derived from planning. And then when I went back to the history of economic development, it has derived from planning. It hasn't its own, and it's for quite new too. It's like the 1970s where they kind of branched off and made economic development in terms of cold calling, where a lot of the planners and textbooks I was reading, that they didn't want to do outreach to businesses. And that's how the field of economic came about. So that was something that was very interesting for me. But in terms of the experience of the challenge I had was definitely getting my ideas across to people and showing them the vision I had, to telling them like this field exists. As I mentioned, the business continuity field, the economic development field. Second being, this vision of this university campus is going to be built. You watch, it's going to be built. It's going to come to fruition. These municipalities are going to win this, proposal. So these are the things that it was hard to convince people. But I feel like there's a process to this whole thing of, economic development and being hopeful. So there was moments of when people say, no, this doesn't exist. You feel kind of like, oh, okay, maybe they know their stuff. But then I realized I'm going to be a little bit more, I don't know, people are going to say I'm petty, but I'd be like, not every PhD is a PhD too. I will say that because the reason why I say that is because I feel when it comes to intellect, there's 1,000 doors behind 1,000 doors in terms of knowledge, if you just keep going through it. So just because someone said it doesn't exist, yeah, there's a possibility it could not in certain scientific terms. But what I'm saying in the field of yourself, of like giving up on yourself, don't. Try looking for the answer. If there isn't, until you've done your research, you can't. Yeah, I would not go on the first person's experience of saying, yeah, I work in immigration and yeah, there's no field of economic development. Okay, I'm going to do my research. Let's see if that's true, right? And I met my group of people. I met my people that were the yay-sayers, not the naysayers when it came to this field, right? They said, yeah, there's us. And I found my community of IEDC where there was 5,000 members, right, all over the world that talk about economic development. So that was something that, like, not to bash degrees or anything, but it's just something that I just learned, like, certain titles are just titles, and you have to make your way through credibility, through your research, through your networking, and that brings you credibility too.
That's really cool, Alia, especially seeing like everything come full circle too, like what you had believed in, what you researched on, the combos you had, and then coming back to that place and seeing like, wow, it's happening. So that's really cool. I'll switch gears a little bit. I'd love to learn about your experience in supply chain resilience. I find that super interesting. So can you talk a bit about your specialty in supply chain resilience and how this impacts economic growth? And for example, like with COVID and the impact there, like what did you see there? And has there been anything post COVID that you've seen have an impact? Like even, for example, currently with maybe trade wars that we're facing or different things, things are just constantly changing all the time. So what have you seen in supply chain resilience and impacts on economic growth?
Yeah, so I feel like I joined an organization back in like 2019. And that time I was still doing my local economic development certificate. So I ended up doing a Canadian version of the IDC training that I had done. So from that, it was like pandemic time, 2020. But when I had applied for the 2019 program, I was like talking to other economic developers, and we kept hearing about Wuhan, the bat virus. Like some people were like, someone ate a bat, and I was like, what? I'm like, okay. And this was like in Toronto. Like these are like off-candid conversations. This is like not offending anyone. But then I started hearing about like, oh, there's a pandemic, there's something that's coming, that's going to impact us. At that time, I feel like in Canada, we weren't as, let's say, even like my friends and my network of people, like nobody was taking it as seriously because it was just something like out of like a movie, right? Something that you hear and you're not sure about. But then in economic development, I felt like even in that profession, there were certain things where we had to do lead generation. So you're actively calling companies, you're talking to them. At that time, I was talking to a lot of US based companies. And they said to me, Alia, we have no intention of expanding. Why are you even calling us? Are you not listening to the news? And it's funny because I love my American friends when it comes to like the reality check. They're very upfront. I feel like Canadians, we're very polite. We're like, even if, there's something like horrible happening, we'll be like, nope, it's good. Everything's fine, But in the American side, we would be like, nah, we're done. We're done for, like they'll give you the cold truth. Doesn't matter how hard it, it's just like, just take the truth and that's it. So when it came to that, like a lot of the businesses were being very direct. They're like, no, we're not, like, do you not know? Are you serious? Like, come on, you're Canada. You should know this. I was like, no, actually, I'm not aware about why you're not planning on expanding. They're like, no, what's happening in the news is like, it's really impacting us because we have our suppliers in the UK, we have suppliers in India, we have suppliers in China, and that is something that's serious. And we're seeing an actual spread of this pandemic, and this is something serious. And it may come to a halt. And I was like, oh, okay. So I ended up going back, and I remember like everyone, in terms of lead generation, when we were doing it, everybody had like a weird interaction because we had like teams divided up as like the US team, then we have the Europe team, and then we had Asia, and everybody was seeing there's a decline in people wanting to talk about expansion. At this point, I felt like the word investment attraction or FDI became like a really negative word. It was like, don't talk about it, don't say that word. It became like a bad word. So I felt like, okay, what do I do? Like, how else can I like help? So then I started looking into like my business. I put on my business continuity hat, and I started looking at, okay, wait, now a business is telling me they have no plans on expanding. What does that mean for me? Where can I leverage? Where can I support them? So then I started going back to all of my notes I had, and I started seeing these companies say, you know what, supplier. That's what we want to look at. I said, there's an opportunity here for us to leverage and focus on a strategy on business continuity, where maybe we can not make few people negative about Canada or negative about our organization, where we can maybe pivot and say, hey, let's talk about your suppliers. Let's talk about how we can help you. How can we get your products across the border? And that's where I got open and introduced to the field of supply chain. That's where I was like, these are the people I want to talk to because they would know. And that's where I felt like, even through my disaster emergency management experiences, I felt that the business continuity people were well aware of what needs to be done for a business to survive, where they should expand, where they should shut down their head office, where they should open up a new office. And that's where I kind of led on. I thought, okay, it's going to be a business continuity person. Then I dig deeper and I found out, no, it's supply chain professionals. And I started looking up different organizations. The one thing that I came across was Reshoring Initiative, which was by Harry Moser. And he still runs that organization and on the US side. And he was looking at reshoring. So looking at how to bring back supply chain back to America. So the Made in America products in America came about, right? Made in USA. Then it started becoming a trend here in Canada, where it was like reshoring Canada, bringing in the products here. And that's what led me to meet MP Tony Clement at that time. And I started talking to them. And Harry Moser was the one that introduced me to Tony Clement about this idea of supply chain and what's happening and getting that perspective. He's like, there's actual work happening on the West Coast or something you want to look into. Um, and it's really interesting work that was being done at that time. But it was a very eye-opening experience too, because we were in a midst of a disaster. Now, the disaster, the benefit of, let's say, the pandemic was that it didn't destroy our infrastructure. No, no, no. It was costly, yes. It had a higher death toll, yes. It did put everything to like a halt, but infrastructure was critical, right? So we were able to still communicate, still talk to each other. The only challenge was how do we get certain products over and be able to distribute it in our communities and stuff. But then it also brought up the conversation around international trade. What does trade look like now? I think like nowadays it's been, I think the pandemic is what has driven the conversation around made in XYZ country products, where people are looking at their own country and saying, how can we support each other, whether it be provinces, whether it be the states, whether it be the municipalities or regions, and how can we make ourselves self-sufficient, right? Because I feel it became the concept of, if your house is on fire, are you going to start, going to other people's houses and trying to help them out? No, you have to help yourself out first. I think it pretty much when it comes to even like when an airline or airplane is going out, you get the oxygen, the requirement is put it on yourself first before you go out help somebody else, right? So I feel like when it comes to international trade or when it comes to this economic recovery, so for you to recover, you got to look inside first. You got to see, what are the problems in my house? How can I fix that? What are the challenges? What do I need to do different? So when it comes to supply chain, I think that's the one group of people that have not gotten, let's say, the limelight or the pat on the back that they deserve, because they're the people that we don't see often. I don't even think they're the ones that even go around on, like, on television and tell you, I'm the supply chain professional and I have this. No, we don't. We have representatives representing them, but we don't have them speaking. And that goes to show that that is one profession that is behind closed doors that nobody really heard about until the pandemic. And that was the one profession that I think nobody considered, that the work that was being done was through the supply chain people. They're the ones that are aware of what product and where to go. Who knew more at that time, I would say, is the businesses. The businesses were telling me, oh, yeah, I'm not expanding because of this problem in my business. I'm not able to get the supply chain or supplier product. I'm not going to do that. That was helped me as a government professional or as a professional in the economic development field kind of go, oh, okay, this is something I have to look into. So it doesn't always mean that I have all the answers. Sometimes the business community, you got to listen, and you got to be a very active listener, not a passive, not like some random, like selective listening, like, okay, this is great. Okay, everything else you said is out the window. I feel like me listening to the businesses and their concerns is what got me into the field of supply chain. Second is talking to people, figuring out where these group of people are, where can I get in, and where can I help, and where can I provide advice. So I feel like in terms of the world of supply chain, my experience is definitely being the pandemic. Definitely working for the organization where we were doing lead generation and we were figuring out from municipalities and from the businesses what was working, what was not. This led to my paper of performance measurement. How do you know you're recovering? The Bright Ideas Award, basically, as like with my partners Amanda and Brandon, we were all looking at the concerns of economic developers. How do we tell each other what our challenges are and how we can help? How will I know that XYZ municipality across the pond is doing better than me or is recovering faster? What are they doing differently? So our performance metrics kind of identified and leveraged disaster emergency management measurements to figure out that this is how you know you're recovering from a disaster, whether it be a pandemic. So for us, what we saw in terms of the pandemic was definitely it's a worldwide disaster. Everybody's in it. So you can't just change the channel. It's not like a tornado that went through Oklahoma and you're like, oh, okay, well, they're not, it's not next to me. It's not community that I care about, right? That you change the channel. No, it's everybody's on the same playing field when it comes to that. Now, certain countries or certain continents where we never thought of connecting or even talking to at that time, because we're like, oh, we're focusing on this specific lead generation or this specific community, which is like, or a country. We're looking at US. Let's not talk to the other ones. we ended up talking. I started sitting on calls. I said, okay, pandemic related conversations around which community, which continent is doing better. And that's when I got on the calls with certain, so they had like an Africa wide call. And the thing is, they had Madagascar, they had Nigeria, they had South Africa, everybody on the call. And they were talking to economic development professionals. And this is at like their, like, let's say federal, at the top. So they're telling us like, oh, from a disaster emergency management perspective, like, how are you guys handling these disasters? I know like those countries were like, we're fine. We're better. We already had prepared for this because this is something that we have outbreaks here, right? For certain diseases, for certain things. And this is how we're able to survive. We're able to manage. Our most stores are closed. Things are open and running. We're self-reliant because we have built those partnerships. So I felt like, I'm like, that's kind of like opened my eyes where I was like, okay, so communities that have had outbreaks are the ones that are recovering faster because they know how to deal with this. It's similar to like diseases too, right? Like I think in the medical field, where if you get a certain sickness, it may not be an American thing, or a Canadian thing, but maybe in the Middle East and even in India, South Asia, this is a common occurrence, and they're well aware of how to mitigate it. So that was something that was very eye-opening for me, where I was like, I got to start hopping on all these international calls, and I want to hear what these communities are doing. And that's where I figured out that they actually had a guidebook. They had a step-by-step guidebook on what economic development people had to do. But what I also learned is that on the investment attraction side, they were lacking an actual investment attraction website. They didn't have that. They were like, we're just relying on photos. We're like, this is a legit photo, and that's what they had. And I'm like, oh, our investment attraction is very like heavy duty. We got like the pitch deck going, we got a website going, we got a website where you can watch videos and all that stuff. And you guys just have this like mini website with photos, and that's how you guys do it. But that's how they do it. So I feel like there's different best practices that you can learn internationally by being connected. And you got to be open to it too. It doesn't have to be, oh, it's not part of my focus area. I don't care. I felt at that time, that's where I started going back and I started talking to my other economic development friends. And I said, hey, let's look at continent by continent and let's country by country. And let's set up these one-on-one calls with these people to figure out what is the actual strategy. Like, how are they addressing this? How do they go about it? And then when it came to like the project itself of like the pandemic and supply chain, I started opening my eyes to number one. By listing to companies, I was able to identify the group of people that they're relying on, which is the supply chain professionals. Through the supply chain professionals, I was able to hop on these calls where they were doing it by continent, by country, by city, and figuring out which ones were more successful. So even though there were certain cities where in Canada where I was like, oh, I don't know how we're going to manage, but I learned that certain provinces on the West Coast were doing much better in managing this disaster than on the East Coast because they were more proficient and they had actual disaster emergency management plans set out. And I'm going to give a shout out to Alberta for that. So the province of Alberta was well equipped. And they have self-awareness of disaster emergency management and how to manage that. So I feel like there's opportunities for us to leverage and learn from each other, from best practices, through connections, through networking, and that opportunity of just open your possibilities. Just don't look in your own neighborhood. Just don't look in your backyard. And then also when it comes to like country and trends right now, I feel like even with this whole bilateral trade problems that we're seeing in economic development, I think this is going to be a conversation that is going to stay in the coming months. And it may even go to the possibility of like the conversation around water and how we kind of preserve that. And that goes back to my work with the Great Lakes Economic Development Council, which is a project I'm working on. I feel like this is where it kind of opened our eyes again that, hey, the pandemic may have been resolved, it may have gone away, but the actual, internal challenges of policies, agreements have not been fixed. Another thing is how we do trade. How do we talk and diversify? Like diversifying the supply chain has been a conversation since the pandemic, right? Once we had those border closures, we all started thinking about diversification, right? So I don't think this new election or new leader should determine us to talk about oh yeah, let's diversify our supply chain. No, this is a conversation that was in the pandemic. I feel like every disaster teaches us about policy changes that we need to look at. It looks at, and it doesn't go away just because the disaster has gone away or you've recovered from it. I think there's underlying issues to kind of recover and become more resilient through that. It's a learning lesson. It's an opportunity to learn from it and grow from it. And if you don't, and you just go back to thinking, oh, everything's okay now, I don't have to work on that, let's put a pause on that, it's going to come back. And we're seeing that through leadership now. We have seen certain leaders call out each other and say, hey, remember at the pandemic or remember that time when you closed the borders on us? Well, now is the time where we're going to do this whole, like, there's a possibility of border closures or possibility of trade uh, disagreements. I think we need to look into that. And then also, I think in economic development, we always have to leverage our business community, their voice. We're the voice for them. And I feel like the business community is not sometimes going to be representing themselves by themselves. They want a community, which is us, to kind of voice it for them. Their expectation is that you will take my concerns and take it up because that's your job. You have to bring into policy. You have to be the person that's representing me because the businesses don't have time. I'm not going to stop my business for 3 days just to go to Ottawa because I need to make a complaint. No, I'm going to rely on my economic development people to do that for me. And I think that's what we have to do for the business community, especially for our profession, because that's what we rely on, businesses.
Yeah, that was great perspective, man. Well, as we get ready to close, before we get out of here, we just want to ask you, how can the listeners connect with you, and any last words of encouragement for the viewers? Um, Anything that you have before we get out of here?
Yeah. So in terms of my last words, I hope nobody get offended by my words. What I'm saying are my opinions. But I try to be optimistic and positive as much as I can. But in terms of like the takeaway is definitely build your community. Put yourself out there. Talk to people, even if it's not your profession, because there's something that you'll learn. There's something that will be a takeaway from it. I think networking should not just happen like virtually. It should not happen just in person. It's just there's numerous ways to still connect with people, right? I feel like just even an email, a message, exchanging phone numbers, just talking on the phone, and then just talking regularly with people, just catching up with them, telling them, hey, this is what project I'm working on. Can you help me with that? Is what's going to get you somewhere. It's going to get you to learn about other people. And that's how I've been in this profession. I've opened myself. I've gone into tables, gone into rooms that I would never been invited to if it wasn't for my networking. And I just continuously network. I don't think networking ends just because you got a job, where it ends because you're just successful now. You got a business going, and you don't have time make time for people. Communicate, and that's the way. And always talk about what you're doing first, in terms of what you're trying to do, in terms of like improving. Just don't talk about your successes. I did this. I did. That's great. That's in the past now. What are you doing now? What are you going to do for tomorrow? How are you going to prepare for the year after that? So I feel like just constantly be on the move. Think about your growth plans. Think about how you can positively impact people. It's really easy to make people feel negative and walk away. It's really easy to say mean things to people. And I feel like as an individual, as a professional, the best way forward is always having that optimistic, good sense of advice, being a friend for everyone first. And don't see everyone as a competition. They're not. They're not your competition. They have other goals. They're not telling you them. They don't have to tell you them. So I feel like when it comes to you feeling, oh, this person, if I tell them this, they're going to take this and run away with it. No, they're not. Even if they do, big whoop, they're not you. They can't be you. Right? So I think that's what makes us unique as an individual. And that's what makes me unique. I am myself. Nobody can replicate me. So I don't have that fear of like, oh, this person's going to take it. Great. If you can apply it, if you have the budget to do it, go ahead, do it. I'm happy. So that's my key takeaway for the audience in terms of networking.
Gotcha. How can they connect with you on LinkedIn? We'll drop it in the chat. But
Yeah.
connect with her on LinkedIn. Where else?
Yeah. So on LinkedIn, like my website, www.consultingwithalia.com, email, my phone number, which is on my website as well. So yeah, I'm more than happy to connect with anyone.
All right. You have anything, Gigi, before we get out of here? Anything else?
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Leah. This has been really insightful for us as well. And we really appreciate your insights and your knowledge too.
No, thank you so much for having me. I just candid talk, heart to heart, and that's it. It was nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for tuning in to another great episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to GCG Worldwide. Be sure to tell a friend and tell a friend. And we appreciate you again, Aaliyah, for being our first special guest for our episode. We thank you. We appreciate you. You're a legend. Keep doing great work. And that's a wrap on another great episode. Thank you, guys.